The fluorescent lights of Ben's garage hummed a weary tune, mirroring the ache in his own bones. It was nearly 10, and the air hung thick with the scent of motor oil and regret. Wrenches lay scattered across his workbench like fallen soldiers, casualties of a war against a particularly stubborn Ford pickup. Ben wiped a streak of grease from his forehead with the back of his hand, leaving a smudge that only amplified his exhaustion. His garage, a cinder-block box tucked away on the outskirts of Harmony Creek, wasn't much to look at, but it was his. The walls were plastered with faded calendars featuring classic cars, their chrome gleaming a defiant shine against the grime. A vintage Coca-Cola sign hung crookedly above the counter, a testament to a bygone era when things were simpler, when cars were just cars, not rolling computers. Harmony Creek itself was a town clinging to its small-town charm, even as the tendrils of the nearby Tesla Gigafactory crept closer, promising or threatening, depending on your perspective, to drag it kicking and screaming into the 21st century. Ben wasn't sure how he felt about the factory. On one hand, it brought jobs. On the other, it brought, well, customers like he expected were about to walk through his door any minute. A stack of overdue bills sat accusingly on the corner of his desk, a constant reminder of the precariousness of his livelihood. The big garages in the next town over were siphoning off most of the business. Folks seemed to prefer fancy waiting rooms and computerized diagnostics to Ben's honest, hands-on approach. He muttered under his breath, a familiar litany of complaints against the modern world. Nobody appreciates a good mechanic anymore. Just want their problems fixed with an app. The bell above the door jingled, its cheerful chime at odds with Ben's sour mood. He braced himself, pasting on a semblance of a customer service smile. A man stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the dimming twilight. He was unremarkable, dressed in jeans and a plain gray sweater, clutching a paper coffee cup like a lifeline. Nothing about him screamed Tesla owner, which, of course, was exactly what made Ben wary. He'd learned the hard way that the quieter they came in, the more complicated, and often ridiculous, their concerns tended to be. "Evening," the man said, his voice mild and polite. "Hope I'm not too late." Ben sighed inwardly. "Depends on what you need. I was just about to close up." He deliberately didn't make eye contact, fiddling with a wrench to emphasize his busyness. "Well, I'm having a bit of a peculiar issue with my car," the man said, stepping further into the garage. Ben finally looked up, his gaze sweeping over the man's face, searching for any sign of technical aptitude. He found none. Just a slightly anxious expression and a smudge of coffee on his cheek. "Peculiar how?" Ben asked, his tone laced with skepticism. "It's a Tesla," the man offered, as if that explained everything. Ben rolled his eyes imperceptibly. "Of course it was. And the peculiarity is, it's making a strange noise," the man continued, "when the regenerative braking kicks in. Sort of a whirring, almost a metallic whine." Ben leaned back against the workbench, crossing his arms. "Regenerative braking, huh? Fancy stuff. Probably just some over-engineered widget doing what it's supposed to do." He chuckled, a sound that held more than a hint of condescension. "These new cars, they got so much going on. Half the time the owners don't even know what they're hearing." The man remained unfazed, sipping his coffee. "I see. But it doesn't sound quite right. It's louder than it used to be, and there's a slight vibration in the steering wheel." Ben snorted. "Vibration? Probably just needs new tires. These electric cars, they're heavy. Eat through tires like nobody's business." He paused, giving the man a pointed look. "Or maybe you're just imagining things." Happens all the time. People get so focused on the technology, they start hearing things that aren't even there. The man tilted his head, considering Ben's words. Perhaps. But I've done some research, and it seems like it might be related to the torque vectoring system. I was reading about harmonic resonance. It seems like it might be related. Ben waved a dismissive hand. Torque vectoring? Harmonic resonance? Look, pal, with all due respect, you're talking about stuff most engineers don't even understand. It's probably just a loose bolt or something simple. These things happen. He deliberately kept his explanation simple, avoiding any technical jargon. The man seemed the type who'd just get confused. So, you think it's something you could take a look at? The man asked, his voice still remarkably calm. Ben hesitated. He really wanted to go home. But the bills were persistent. All right, he said, with a sigh that he hoped conveyed the magnitude of the favor he was doing. I'll take a look, but don't expect miracles. And it ain't gonna be cheap. These Teslas, they're a whole different breed. Gotta have special tools, special knowledge. He trailed off, letting the implication hang in the air. Knowledge that he possessed, and this clueless customer clearly lacked. He gestured towards the waiting area, a couple of worn chairs and a stack of outdated magazines. Have a seat. Might be a while. And maybe stick to ordering lattes, huh? Leave the car stuff to the professionals. He turned back to the Ford pickup, grabbing a wrench with unnecessary force. He felt a surge of irritation. Another late night, another clueless customer. It was always the same. He was just about to loosen the final bolt to the pickup's engine block when he heard the man say, "Well, I'm happy to wait. I'm sure you'll figure it out." Ben hoisted the Tesla onto the lift, the hydraulic hum a counterpoint to the incessant metallic whine emanating from the car's underbelly. He still muttered under his breath, a low rumble of discontent directed as much at himself as at the gleaming white vehicle now suspended in the air. "Fancy regenerative braking," he grumbled. "More like regenerative headache, if you ask me." He peered at the brake pads, half expecting to find them disintegrated. Probably just some cheap Chinese steel they used to save a buck. The man, the Tesla owner, leaned against a nearby workbench, observing Ben with an unnerving quiet. He hadn't moved from his spot since Ben had started, merely sipping his coffee and watching. Ben found it irritating. He was used to customers pacing, asking a million questions, or offering unsolicited advice. This quiet observation felt different, more like being studied than watched. "Strange noise, huh?" Ben said, more to break the silence than to solicit information. "Sounds like a loose brake pad to me. Common problem, even on these high-tech marvels." He gave the brake pads a cursory glance. They looked fine. Scratch that theory. It's most prominent during deceleration, specifically when the regenerative braking system is engaged above a certain threshold, the man offered, his voice even and calm. Ben paused, wrench in hand. "Yeah, that's what you said," he replied, trying to keep his tone casual, dismissive even. "Regenerative braking. It's just fancy engine braking. Uses the motor to slow you down instead of the brakes. Nothing to it." The man tilted his head slightly. While that is a simplified explanation, the Tesla system is considerably more complex. It utilizes a sophisticated algorithm to blend regenerative braking with mechanical braking, optimizing for both efficiency and driver feel. The interplay between the electric motor's torque vectoring and the hydraulic braking system is quite nuanced. Ben frowned. Torque vectoring? Nuanced interplay? This guy was throwing around terms he'd only read in technical manuals. Manuals he usually skipped over in favor of more practical troubleshooting guides. He tried to steer the conversation back to familiar territory. Right. Well, even with all that fancy stuff, it still comes down to basic mechanics. Pads wear, rotors warp, calipers seize. Simple as that. He gestured with the wrench. Let's not overthink it. He started inspecting the calipers, but the man continued, his voice still remarkably even. Have you considered the possibility of harmonic resonance within the drivetrain, particularly concerning the interaction between the inverter and the stator windings during high-speed deceleration? Ben stopped dead, the wrench clanging against the caliper with a metallic thud. Harmonic resonance? Inverter? Stator windings? He stared at the man, his mind struggling to reconcile the unassuming appearance with the sudden barrage of technical jargon. This wasn't the language of a clueless tech bro. This was something else entirely. Look, Ben said, his voice losing some of its earlier condescension. I appreciate the input, but I've been doing this for 20 years. I know brakes, and regenerative braking or not, it still just brakes. He tried to regain control of the situation, to reassert his expertise, but the ground felt shaky beneath his feet. The man simply nodded, his expression unreadable. Of course, but perhaps it would be beneficial to examine the software parameters governing the torque distribution during regenerative events? A miscalibration could potentially induce stress on the drivetrain components, leading to the observed acoustic anomaly. Ben felt a bead of sweat trickle down his forehead. Software parameters? Torque distribution? Acoustic anomaly? He was drowning in a sea of technological terms, out of his depth in his own garage. He knew he should probably just pull the wheel off, inspect the pads, and move on. But he was suddenly paralyzed by the fear of looking like a complete idiot. He swallowed hard. Okay, he said slowly, trying to sound confident. Let's say, hypothetically, it is something like that. What exactly are you thinking? The man finally smiled, a small, subtle curve of his lips that sent a shiver down Ben's spine. I suspect a specific software glitch affecting the torque vectoring control during high-speed deceleration. It could be creating a harmonic resonance within the drivetrain, as I mentioned earlier. The frequency of the resonance would be dependent on the vehicle's speed and the level of regenerative braking being applied. Ben stared at him, dumbfounded. The man wasn't just throwing out buzzwords. He was describing a complex, highly specific problem with pinpoint accuracy. He was diagnosing a rare, obscure issue that Ben had only vaguely heard whispers about in online forums. And how would you fix something like that? Ben stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. The man shrugged, a disarmingly casual gesture. A software patch targeting the torque vectoring algorithm should mitigate the issue. It would involve recalibrating the parameters to dampen the harmonic resonance. Ben felt his face flush. He had been so quick to judge, so eager to dismiss this man as another clueless customer. Now he was standing here, humbled and humiliated, realizing he was in the presence of someone who possessed a level of technical knowledge that far surpassed his own. He was out of his depth, and he knew it. The silence stretched, thick and heavy with Ben's dawning realization. He could hear the faint hum of the garage lights, the distant rumble of a truck on the highway, and the frantic beating of his own heart. He knew he had to say something, but the words seemed to catch in his throat. Finally, the man spoke, his voice calm and reassuring. I apologize if I've overwhelmed you with technical details. I sometimes get carried away. He paused, and the subtle smile returned to his lips. My name is Elon. The name hung in the air, a single word that shattered Ben's remaining composure. Elon, not just any Elon. The Behe, Elon Musk, standing in his garage in Harmony Creek, holding a coffee cup, diagnosing a glitch in his own damn car. Ben's jaw dropped. He felt a wave of dizziness wash over him. He grabbed the nearest support beam for balance, his knuckles turning white. This couldn't be happening. This had to be some kind of bizarre dream. Elon Musk, the man who was revolutionizing the automotive industry, the man who was sending rockets into space, the man who was standing in his greasy garage, offering him a technical explanation about regenerative braking. Elon Musk? Ben finally managed to croak out, his voice barely audible. Elon chuckled softly. Guilty as charged. I'm personally testing some experimental software updates on this Model S. I like to get real-world feedback. Ben was utterly speechless. The air in the garage, thick with the scent of oil and exhaust fumes, seemed to solidify around him, making it hard to breathe. He swallowed, his throat suddenly dry as sandpaper. All he could manage was a mumbled, Mr. Musk? Elon, the man who was very clearly Elon Musk, offered a warm, almost conspiratorial chuckle. Just Elon is fine, Ben. And, please, no need for apologies. I've been called worse. He gestured around the cluttered garage with a sweep of his hand. Besides, I rather enjoy catching people off guard. Keeps things interesting. Ben's face burned with a mixture of embarrassment and genuine remorse. I had no idea. I just assumed. You know, another customer thinking they know more than they do. He ran a greasy hand through his already disheveled hair. I am so sorry for being condescending. You probably know more about this car than anyone. Elon's eyes twinkled. Perhaps, but you know things. I don't, Ben. That's the beauty of it. He paused, his gaze sweeping over the Tesla still suspended on the lift. You've got a knack for the practical, the tangible. I can throw all the simulations and sensors I want at a problem, but sometimes it takes a real mechanic, someone who can feel the vibrations in the wrench, to truly understand what's going on. Ben, still reeling, managed a weak smile. I guess I've been turning wrenches long enough. You pick up a few things. Exactly. Elon's tone was enthusiastic. And that's precisely what I'm looking for. We build these cars with the best technology, the most advanced algorithms, but technology isn't perfect. It needs real-world feedback, someone who can bridge the gap between the theoretical and the actual. He leaned slightly closer, his voice dropping a notch. The engineers design it, the programmers code it, but the mechanics, they feel it. He straightened up, his gaze intense. That little whine you heard, the one I mentioned, it wasn't picked up by any of our diagnostics. The AI dismissed it as within acceptable parameters. Even our test drivers didn't notice it. But you did. You heard it, you felt it, and you knew something wasn't quite right. Ben, humbled and a little awestruck, could only nod. He had heard the whine, a subtle dissonance in the symphony of the electric motor. He'd dismissed it at first, attributing it to the usual quirks of a complex machine. But something about it had nagged at him, a feeling that something was amiss. We need more people like you, Ben, Elon continued, his tone earnest. People who aren't afraid to get their hands dirty, who trust their instincts, and who can think outside the box. That's why I'm here. He paused, letting the words hang in the air. I'm putting together a small, confidential team at the Gigafactory. We're focused on improving the real-world reliability of our technology, identifying those little gremlins that the AI and the test drivers miss. We need people who can provide feedback on the software long after the engineers have finished with the vehicle. Elon reached into his pocket and pulled out a card, simple and understated, with just the Tesla logo and a phone number. He handed it to Ben. It's a project that requires a unique blend of traditional skills and the ability to quickly learn new technologies. We need someone who can speak both the language of the wrench and the language of the computer. He folded his arms. The compensation is generous. More importantly, it's a chance to contribute to something bigger, to be at the forefront of automotive innovation. He paused again, his expression expectant. So, Ben, what do you say? Are you interested in working on a confidential project at Tesla? Ben stared at the card in his hand, his heart pounding in his chest. The Tesla Gigafactory, a place he'd considered the enemy, the harbinger of his garage's demise, was now offering him a lifeline, a chance to not just survive, but thrive. He thought of the overdue bills, the mounting pressure to keep his business afloat, and the nagging fear that he was being left behind in a rapidly changing world. But more than that, he thought of the challenge, the opportunity to learn and grow, to contribute his skills to something truly innovative. "Mr. Elon," he stammered, I don't know what to say. I'm just a mechanic." Elon smiled, a genuine, encouraging smile. "You're more than just a mechanic, Ben. You're a problem solver, a diagnostician, someone who understands the inner workings of machines, and that's exactly what we need." Ben took a deep breath, the scent of oil and exhaust suddenly smelling like opportunity. "Yes," he said, his voice stronger now, filled with a newfound determination. "Yes, I am interested. More than interested. I accept." Elon clapped him on the shoulder, a gesture of camaraderie. "Excellent! I knew I hadn't misjudged you. I'll have someone from HR reach out to you with the details. The project is starting soon, so be ready to hit the ground running." He stepped back, his gaze sweeping over the garage one last time. "I have to get going. Got to get back to the factory to iron out a few things." He turned towards the Tesla, still on the lift. "Thanks again for your help, Ben. You've been invaluable." As Elon began to lower the car, he turned back to Ben. "Oh, and Ben, one more thing. Keep that coffee cup. It's good for reminding us to stay grounded." With that, he pressed a button, and the Tesla silently descended to the floor. Ben watched, mesmerized, as Elon slid into the driver's seat. With a smooth, almost imperceptible hum, the Tesla glided out of the garage and disappeared into the night. Ben stood there for a long moment, the Tesla card still clutched in his hand. The silence of the garage, usually a source of comfort, now felt different, charged with a sense of possibility. He looked around at his cluttered workspace, at the tools he knew so well, at the engines he had coaxed back to life. It was still his world, but now it was a world connected to something bigger, something more exciting. He let out a long, slow breath, a mixture of relief, excitement, and disbelief washing over him. He, Ben, the struggling mechanic from Harmony Creek, was going to work for Tesla. He was going to work alongside Elon Musk. He walked over to his workbench, picked up a rag, and began wiping the grease from his hands. As he cleaned, he couldn't help but smile. The future, it seemed, was electric, and he was ready to plug in. He looked forward to working with the Tesla engineers and providing his expert feedback. He was grateful for the opportunity to work on cutting-edge technology. He spent the next hour cleaning up the garage, a task that usually felt like a chore now filled with a sense of purpose. He imagined telling his wife, Sarah, about the offer. He knew she would be thrilled, not just for the financial security it would bring, but for the validation of his skills and the chance to pursue his passion. As he locked up the garage for the night, he looked up at the stars, a sense of gratitude washing over him. He had come close to misjudging the situation and missing his opportunity. But because he was open to it, An electric adventure was just beginning.